Hello, science and magic. I am so excited for this conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Liz Andolong. Liz is a wellness practitioner and facilitator, and she shares many different skill sets: yoga, meditation, Reiki, teaching, just to name a few. And in my experience of Liz, she shows up in this super grounded, earthy space. Kind of feels like an exhale in my body whenever I'm around Liz. And I've never been around her in person, which is funny, but I really do feel like we have this really sweet connection and any time that we've shared conversation over the phone or Zoom. So, welcome to the show, Liz. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're so welcome. So, the way that I approach this show, and listeners kind of know this, is I like to get a feel for who the people I'm having a conversation with are. And we start at, in some ways, the beginning of what are some tidbits about your upbringing or your childhood or any life events that you feel like might be important for the listener to hear and understand this bigger picture of maybe how you got to be where you're at. And I know it's a huge question, but it's whatever arises naturally for you.
It's interesting being in the wellness space, how rarely I've ever really told my story of how I've gotten to be on this journey and to where I am now. And reflecting back, I feel like there are a couple different avenues that feel really important to highlight. One of them being the fact that I'm a first generation Filipina American woman. And growing up as a first gen Filipino American is an interesting intersection, mostly because so much of my life, I think, I personally felt like I thought my life would end up in a wholly different space. If you would have asked me or told me maybe 10, 15 years ago that I would be helping people to be more embodied in their bodies and be more present with themselves, I probably would have laughed at you. And I think at the same time, it makes sense to me because I think even at a young, early age, I was always so interested in bodies. I wanted to be a cardiovascular surgeon ever since I was like in second grade. For some reason, I just thought bodies were so cool. I thought biology was the coolest thing. And I just loved the idea of also helping people be healthy. There was something about that I don't think I probably fully comprehended in second grade. And the natural career path was just doctor, right? Like, here is health, here's this path, this is how we do. And tying that back into being a first gen Filipina American, I think, when I think of Asian culture, I also think so much of like model minority and how many of, specifically in Filipino cultures, we've got so many nurses and so many people that push to become doctors that healthcare seems like a good fit and field. And the funny part is that I was such a creative child that while I got good grades in school, when push came to shove in college, I remember having like an 8 a.m. organic chemistry class and just completely just not being engaged and being like, oh man, is this what really the next 12 years of my life is going to be? So there's that avenue of, I think, being on this journey, there was so much resistance for me to begin to believe in a path that was outside of traditional corporate culture or even outside of a traditional job. And I think that arises so much when I think about all the ways in which this journey has already been there all along, but it really took time for me to heed that call. Or what I like to say is that the call was in me for a while, But first it starts as a whisper or even just as a nudge or an idea. And then I think over time that call becomes louder and louder where you just can't ignore it anymore. So there's that avenue. The second avenue is that spirituality and religion, I think more so spirituality now, have been a really big pillar of my life ever since I was young. I was really fortunate to be raised in a family that is traditionally Catholic. And so, every Sunday we'd go to church and we believed in God, and prayer was a huge, huge part of even just my family. I would say even lineage. I think there is, I wonder if you've ever seen the Beyonce documentary, but in it, she talks about how she also talks about religion and prayer and how there's been intergenerational prayer her entire life, where her great grandmother prayed for her and her daughters and so forth. And that was something that resonated for me, where spirituality was a huge part of my life growing up. But in that, I feel really lucky that I had an aunt who is about, I think, 11 months older than my mom. And I felt that she was the original seeker. And so she would bring me to Jewish temples, she'd bring me to Hindu temples. She was always about coloring in my life experiences in ways that were not just traditionally expected of my family. So ever since a young age, I've always been lucky to be exposed to so many different religions and experiences of sacred houses of worship. So spirituality for me was something that, much like the resistance that I had about figuring out what career or what role I played in society, it was figuring out how to integrate this reverence that I had for something that I couldn't explain, that wasn't tactile, or, you couldn't taste it or smell it or touch it, you can just feel it. And I think that seeking for the understanding of something greater than myself has always been a North Star on my path. And the third avenue, and thank you for listening to all of this, because
I
there's just
love
so
it.
many things that come into it. The third path is that I've always been so connected to my body ever since I was young. I grew up as a pretty sensitive child, and that really manifested as a consistently sick kid. So when I was born, I had pretty intense and severe asthma, and that limited a lot of activities that I could do. I had a lot of my childhood spent hooked up to a nebulizer, which, for those who might not know, is pretty much a machine that kind of pumps aerated drugs so that you can kind of expand your bronchi and breathe. And it's this big clunky machine, back then, big clunky machine that just makes a lot of noise, and you kind of just have to be stuck on this machine for a bit of time so you can come back to regulate your breathing. And so I think I spent a lot of time, one, growing up mostly as an only child for the first 11 years of my life, and two, working with a really sensitive body and a sensitive nervous system and a sensitive immune system that I think back then we didn't have the language that we do now to kind of incorporate mental health or emotional health. And it's interesting now, which I'm sure we can talk about later, to learn more about trauma and how that could be passed on from mother to child and how it affects our immune systems. But being such a sickly kid, it was frustrating growing up, where I couldn't play soccer because I couldn't run like everyone else. I did a lot of solo art forms. So I did dance for most of my life, and I'm thankful for dance, specifically ballet, because that slow, sustained movement was something that I could do and feel physical and strong in my body. And it gave me that foundation of recognizing that that body-mind integration was so important, but almost so inherent that it wouldn't be later in my life that I would understand that this would be so important. And so distilling all those down, coming down from, you know, being a first gen Filipino American, understanding that spirituality is a huge part of my life, and then really having this understanding about bodies and energies and feelings, it wouldn't be until my 20s that I started realizing that health was really the first indicator for me. Health and breakups, actually, were like the two areas that brought me on this path. And I think it was always in the pursuit of healing my heart with my emotions that pushed me to discover, like, how can I heal this in myself? You know, like, what can I do to better myself? And then also recognizing that I had so many health issues that showed up in my 20s. Like, I think I was like 22, 23, and had these intense stomach ulcers where, like, I was also working in advertising and drinking a ton and, like, you know, living life without thoughts of repercussions.
Mm.
But I got to the point where I couldn't eat foods. I got to a point where sleeping was tough, and I just had a feeling there has to be something better than this. And so that's kind of what kept guiding me towards exploring all these modalities. And especially as someone who, I call myself a recovering type A, where I had such a hard time sitting with myself and my body. I was a consistent doer. Burnout was a place that I thrived and was familiar with. And, like, I think I love the adrenaline of kind of being in burnout. So to really get radically honest with myself and really start to turn that search within myself was kind of the of how I kind of the beginning of how I started this journey.
Wow. There's so much goodness in what you shared, and I hear elements of literal science being this pathway to become a cardiovascular, I don't know, remember if you said surgeon or doctor, taking science classes in college and also simultaneously exploring spirituality in the unknown and letting the unknown guide your life. And at the same time, bringing in that element of embodiment through dance and through movement. So, listeners, can you see why I brought Liz on the show? It's all of the elements that I love talking about. So, thank you for sharing your story and all of these different avenues that have brought you to where you're at this point. And I know, a lot of people who follow my work are high achievers, maybe more of that type A personality as well, and crave rest, but can't quite find a way to be in their body and to be in a state of replenishment. So I'm imagining you kind of in your 20s, living life, being young, but approaching burnout, which is a lot of people's stories. And I have my own story of finding burnout in my 20s as well. What what shifted for you? Like, what was that pivotal moment where you're like, something has to change? Was there a podcast you listened to, or was it just like, I literally cannot wake up another day like this? Like, I need to try a meditation, or what was that shift from this, like, I need to snap out of this and do something different?
I think it comes back to I think I'm such a, like, when I'm hell bent on doing something, I will do it and do it and do it. And alternatively, if it's not a full body yes for me, then I'll just keep shoving it aside. So when I think about, like, when that light switched for me, or when it finally came into those pieces of, like, okay, this has to change, I think it there was never a moment. I think there was an accumulation of moments where it's almost like, when you are trying to create a new habit, or, like, let's say you're, at the start of the new year, trying to start something new, and you, like, make this incredible progress, and then you're like, oh, I can relax a little bit and, like, go back. It has always felt like a slippery slope for me, as far as having these light bulb moments of knowing with deeply aware, intense clarity, which almost, I think, often scares me, still probably to this day, where I'll have these moments of like, ooh, I got to do this. And I'm like, do I? And then, scaling it back and being like, well, maybe trying it on for size. But if I could pinpoint a moment, I remember it must have been, I'm so bad with time. There are people that like know the specific month and date. It must have been, I don't know, 6 to 8 years ago, where I woke up from the middle of the night and I was 100% sure that either my appendix was going to burst or there was just this intense amount of pain emanating from my stomach. And as someone who carries a lot of their tension in my stomach and someone who is sensitive to food, which I was very much in resistance to for a while because I love food, it was terrifying because I've never been woken up in the middle of the night with an extreme amount of pain, living in a city. I think it was like a weekend where all my roommates were gone too. So it was a very isolating incident where like I'm in a tremendous amount of pain. I remember vividly I think it was like the Lyft ride to the hospital and trying to figure out in this immense amount of pain, like which hospital would take me if I had insurance at that time. I remember like my life just felt like I was trying to pull these pieces together. I think I was working 3 different jobs, barely making rent, in a ton amount of debt. So everything was happening. I get to the ER and I spend a night there and they can't figure out what's going on. Nothing. They've done all these scans, which as they're doing this and running through this essential checklist, if you've ever been to the ER, they basically want to kind of be able to run through any of the major things. Like, do you need emergency surgery? Like, are there things that we need to pay attention to? So none of those things were coming up. And I remember being discharged feeling so defeated, going home after an overnight stay where, every few hours they're poking and prodding you and checking things. I think they did. I don't remember what it is. I think it was like an MRI scan and so many ultrasounds, nothing came up. And going home and then returning actually back to the ER the next day because the pain that I was feeling was still present. And I think they put me on the highest level of medication. I think they put me on Dilaudid, which is, I think, even higher than morphine. So there was something at that point where I was like, okay, if the doctors can't figure this out, I'm determined to figure out what is going on with me, what is happening, and how to heal this. Because I don't think drugs are it. I don't think Western medicine had enough of a birth to make sense of that. And even from that point, I don't think I was fully committed to what that journey looked like to really make a change. I think it came in waves too, where so many other things happened where I had made the decision as well to begin to listen to my body because I recognize that in this current healthcare system, it's really difficult to create relationships with doctors who don't get the full picture or get to know you all the way through your care. And I remember having so many thoughts about birth control. I had been on birth control for a long time, but felt really certain that, I wanted to make a change and be able to like tune into my feminine body. And the other big moment was coming off of birth control and recognizing that so much of my body's innate ways of regulating my own hormones, my cycle, everything, it was almost like this veil had lifted. And what I was left with was really severe adrenal fatigue. So it was like almost like the switch half turned on when I had that ER visit 6 to 8 years ago. But then it wasn't until maybe, I would say 3 years after that, that when I couldn't get out of bed and I would be needing to sleep about like 14 to 16 hours a day, which impacts being able to make money, having a business, doing all the things that you want to do. that was then when I was like, okay, I really need to make this choice. And the reason why I went to detail is because I think it's so easy to pinpoint like one moment, but I want to humanize that like there are so many decisions that we make, and that it took me from the outside looking in, it could look like this is a choice I've made my entire life. But let me tell you that it was multiple decisions, and I wasn't heeding that call until it became a point where I couldn't get out of bed anymore. And I hope that, there are people out there that can listen and maybe learn from my experiences.
And thank you so much for sharing that story. Yeah, burnout is so common in our society, and it's a society that we live in that, for the most part, honors productivity and busyness and scheduling things back to back to get the most packed into a day, and being outward, really connecting with others, which isn't bad. Connections are beautiful. But there's also this balance into connecting to ourselves. And adrenal fatigue for listeners happens when the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight part of the nervous system, is continually on. And it takes an incredible amount of energy. And over time, the body's energy reserves get drained, essentially. And so there's extreme exhaustion that follows that. And what rest does is rest allows the other branch of the nervous system that replenishes the body through a variety of ways to turn on. And it's so cool because the body can work its way towards healing on its own, given the space and given the feeling of safety and the perception of safety even. So I know, Liz, that your main vision is really to empower every body to connect with rest so that they don't reach this state of burnout. And I know you shared your journey about how you've come to this vision, but I wonder if you might speak about, so after that state of burnout, and you're like, something has to change, I need to rest, and you saw the value of rest. Why do you believe that rest is important in our society? Like what does rest give you? And it's interesting because rest, I mean, we just feel it. We're like, oh yeah, everyone can think of the word rest. Like it's hard to talk about. Like it just feels good and natural to do. So if you maybe can't think of why, really, because we've talked about why rest is important, but also what challenges you faced towards rest. So either of those inquiries, maybe.
I think they go so much hand in hand. Like the resistance that I kind of alluded to with one of the avenues of how I got here is, coming from an immigrant family, in addition to a society that already promotes doing, being, handling, creating, conquering. um, there was so much of me that felt guilty of just literally thinking of my ancestors in the fields with no shoes, working and toiling so that I could be here, and then spending most of my day in bed or doing nothing. There was just so much inner torment and turmoil that came up for me around that. And I think so much of the initial stages of when I was, well, one, I think I was giving an ultimatum pretty much from my one acupuncturist who, man, I can't say thank you enough to acupuncture for truly, I believe, saving my life. It was an acupuncturist and naturopath that helped me discover that I was in adrenal fatigue, and got me on the path to figuring out how to come back to me feeling me, which has been its own journey. But I remember the ultimatum of that doctor in person, and it was multiple doctors and people. Again, if you're in human design, I'm a 1-3, and I need to learn through trial and error is what I need to do. And it was like an ultimatum. It's like, you need to rest. Your body literally does not have enough in it for you to be able to do anything. You feel tired getting up out of bed? Yeah, that's your body telling you you do not have enough energy to get out of bed. So you need to do nothing. And I remember being in the room being like, you really are telling me to do nothing. They're like, yeah, sleep, lay down. If you can't sleep, just lay down. Be there. You can listen to music. Even watching intense TV shows could tax your system. Like every little thing, it went against everything that I stood for. Like I was in my mind, the best multitasker, the person that was can do, could do. I had so much life to live. There were so many places I needed to visit or do or be. And here's this person telling me to stop everything. And the cost of that was if I didn't choose myself, there would be no me to give and do and focus on what I wanted to share with the world. And for me, that was a non-negotiable where it was like, okay, well, I can run myself into the ground, or I can really choose to practice this opportunity of exploring what rest is and how it does. And I think even through and through, I must be a really stubborn person because I was just like learning how to rest seems like it's the easiest thing in the world, right? When someone's like rest, it's like, great, you gave me permission to sleep, but I couldn't tell you how many people or students or clients that I work with that sleep is not something that comes easily for people. So it really branched me out into a couple different, many different modalities of rest, because rest for me had to come from first my mind, right? I think like when we think of rest, and immediately synonymous is sleep, but rest is for me a mind, a body, and a spirit activity. Like, can I invite my mind, which is often go, 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 to begin to just unwind a little bit and recognize that the way that I'm wired or my default way of living is so much in either constantly living in the future and figuring out the best course of action instead of being here, or living in the past because I'm still figuring out how to make things better and adjust. I think adaptability is one of my greatest skills, and it's what keeps me in control of my mind space. And then, body-wise, I had to learn to read my body's signs. Like, even if I had the foundation of growing up dancing and being in my body, it was connecting all of the pieces together of like, oh, this is what it feels like when my body is tense. Or even like, I remember a body worker telling me, I don't know if you've noticed, like the arches of your feet are super tense. And it could be worth looking into that perhaps when you begin to become a bit ungrounded, that maybe the arches of your feet first come off of the ground. And I was like, this is revolutionary, like, but it makes sense. And then if I could get my mind and then my body to rest, then I noticed that the real gift was my spirit began to rest. And when my spirit rests, it's almost like you're in that flow state. And that's truly where I think our greatest power comes from, is that rest state. And I know that you and I have talked about this of, like, I think rest is almost, for me, like a mindfulness and present practice in every moment, because you could be resting and washing the dishes. You could be resting and eating food. Rest doesn't need to just simply be taking a nap, which there's so many things about naps, by the way. If you need to read a book, there's a great book called Take a Nap, Change Your Life, which revolutionized my thoughts on understanding that naps need to be either 20 minutes or 90 minutes. But I think, so, speaking to the challenges of rest, I think there are just so many barriers that we, and myself personally, put up before feeling like we're worthy or deserving of rest. And what I love so much, like, I think immediately of the nap ministry and what they're doing to remind us that rest is our sovereignty. Rest even like what you said, Amanda, is what recharges us. Like now I think my relationship with rest is even giving my schedule spaciousness so that I can create. Like rest allows me that time and space to be, and it allows the creativity to come through.
Yeah, there's so much. Like with rest too, I love how you said you can rest while you do dishes or rest while you're going on a walk. In the state of being in rest, it truly asks for us to know that we're safe, because when we're not in rest, it might mean that there's a threat around us, or the nervous system perceives a threat. So I like that you say that we can be in a state of rest while doing things, because not everybody has the space in their schedule to take long chunks of rest in their day. And it makes rest more accessible when it can be accessed when being in a state of quote unquote doing. But when the body's at rest, it means that it's not on high alert. It's not looking for perceived danger. And there's a lot of things I do with my clients to sense their body, to work with the nervous system in that way. And I know you do as well. So I think that was a really beautiful way to describe rest as not just being taking a nap. And naps are amazing. I'm curious, so much about my journey with rest has been having conversations or living in what feels like a radical way in our society, setting boundaries, shifting perceptions through those conversations. And a lot of our beliefs come from our upbringing. And I'm curious if you're willing to share what, if any, conversations you've been able to have with your family as you've developed your relationship with rest, and how it's been received from your family. If you feel, yeah, anything around that exchange.
I think so much. One, I think there's been a change in me where I think I've definitely shifted from, in my experience of my 20s, I was so about like breaking the mold and being rebellious and just like doing whatever the F I wanted to do. And like, if no one understood me, whatever, I don't care. And I think now that I've transitioned into this third decade of life, it's more about, yes, you can still have that fire within you, and there's something about having grace and like a finesse to how you do those things. And I think with that, there's a long-standing family joke where I call myself the black sheep of the family. It's not even true. It's just that I'm always the person that's like, I asked my mom, I think, I was like, is there anything that I do that surprises you anymore? She goes, oh, no. I've known you your whole life. There's nothing you can do that surprises me anymore. And I'm like, okay. So I'll start by saying that I think my family's been so supportive in their own way, which doesn't mean that it wasn't without friction. It doesn't mean that it wasn't without lots of misunderstandings or standing on separate sides of a line that, we just agree to disagree. And I think probably the hardest thing is when you're kind of going through your own journey, it's really easy to become myopic with your own thing, especially when you're in the pursuit of your own health and wellness, like very foundational things. I think my family saw firsthand what it was like for me to have all this energy, be really engaged and excited about life, and then see me struggle so much with mental health, with my physical well-being, with like eating, like even with our own culture, Filipino food is really like really fatty, not the most healthy like food, but really like delicious. Like there were just so many ways in which I had to shift where like my diet had to change. So even down to like Thanksgivings, I had to figure out like dairy free, less meat, gluten-free. Like, it was pretty impossible to find like gluten-free stuffing for a while, and now they've gotten better. But small changes like that, or even through spirituality, I think, and for those that have known me, I swear I have studied so many of the different traditions and religions. Like, I converted to Islam, I studied Buddhism. Being able to have a family that's able to see you where you're at, I guess, is what I'm coming from, and saying that I feel lucky that they've stuck by me, because I am definitely a seeker and I've seeked so many things. And how that shows up now in a relationship is I realize that it's different when you're trying to impose these changes on family or loved ones, whether it's blood, chosen, or other. And it's different to live in your own truth and almost model, and then have that person or individual decide if they want to get on that same ride or the bus or the train that you're on, or cheer you on from the sidelines. And now it's been really wonderful. Like, actually, quite recently, I was able to introduce my acupuncturist to both my brother and my mom. And it was a big moment where my mom invited both me and my brother into the room with her to talk through her treatment plan with acupuncture, and hear her say, like, whatever you think is best for me, I'm willing to do. And to believe in, I don't even want to call acupuncture an alternative healing modality, because for me it's like the foremost,
Yeah.
like, but it was just a big moment for me. And even in the moment where she sent a text and she's like, thank you for reminding us that the most important thing that we have is our health. And I just feel like, because I've been on my own crusade for so long for myself selfishly, to see that ripple out was just a cool moment. So I guess the conversation piece is, I learned over time that I can't like force people into conversations of like, I think this is why we should do like such and such and such. But if people are interested and they see the changes in your life, I think it's a more beautiful and more easeful way to almost just be in your truth and then have the conversations as they naturally arise.
That's it. As we change and you glow, Liz, you completely glow. And then those around us are like, I want what she has. I want what that person has. What are they doing? And then they ask the questions. And it's funny with my mom. One of the ways I got out of burnout was I stumbled upon my yoga practice. And I started to realize I had pretty bad anxiety, like in so many ways. I couldn't sleep. I had a hard time being social. But I found that if I would make it to my yoga practice 4 times a week, my anxiety levels were just managed. So for a while, even when traveling, I had to make it to yoga. From the outside, it could look like an addiction, but really what I was doing was taking my daily supplements and taking my medication. And my mom she would just be irritated, like, you really have to go to yoga right now. We're somewhere new. But I just held that boundary. And over the years, she knows that that's just how I am and what I need. And it just is. So it's a little bit of setting boundaries and saying, this is what I need. I don't need you to do this with me, but I need this. And you can cheer me on from the sidelines or not. I'm going to do it. And then over time, the people who love you, they want to see you well. And so they'll see the change in you and then hopefully support you in it, or at least not try to get you to not do it. So yeah, family can be tricky. And so, I mean, there's so much conversation we could even have around work culture and like what that looks like and setting boundaries. And I really think that when we do set structure and live in a certain way, it's changing culture. We can be change agents for rest and well-being and work by doing the thing ourselves and doing what we need to do and showing up to work glowing with eyes that are sparkling, rested, calm, non-reactive. Like, who doesn't want to work with someone who is like that? that would just make so much sense. But we have to be it first almost, because in general, society is just conditioned to be in a rush. So I love how you shared your experience with your family and how it's changed over time, slowly, with a little friction, obviously, at times, but in a way that's trickled into your family, really. So that's very, very beautiful. When thinking about your connection to your own rest on a daily basis or maybe weekly basis, what does that look like? Like, what are some tangible ways that you work with your nervous system? What are practices that you do?
I think, Amanda, when you were talking about going to yoga 4 times a week, there's a little bit of like jealousy and envy that I had because I, for some reason, am a person that has always just been almost like so fluid, and routines have been so difficult for me that I think that I always felt so isolated in that, where it's like, even compared to like my brother, who plays professional baseball, he's so able, he could eat the same thing 3 times a day, not have a worry. And like, he wakes up, he like works out, he reads, he journals, like there are things. But I found for me, I always feel so differently, and I'm such a feeler that I really can't do something unless I'm wholeheartedly in it. And so my relationship to my rest or my rest rituals, I've had to create almost like a toolkit for myself and give myself the grace and the kindness and compassion to understand that I'm just not built like that. Like, my routine may look like practicing working out really hard one day and then recognizing, ooh, my body really still feels tired 4 days after, so maybe I shouldn't do this. So let me rewind and come back to what my rest rituals are. But one, I just wanted to share that, like, for folks that maybe feel the same way about routine or struggling to find routine, no, you're not alone. And I think the greatest tip that I have, or the experience that I have, is creating that toolkit where I think subconsciously some of the things that I do can be amended and changed every day. So, dependent on how I feel, I think if I could have like an essentialist list of what I do, a rest practice that's really important for me is dry brushing my body. And that's something that I've kept up with pretty often before I come into the shower. One, I love the practice of showering, and I know, especially in California, we're in a drought right now, so I'm sure there'll be people that'll be upset with how much I shower or bathe. But for me, bathing and showering is not just a body cleanliness thing, it's also an energetic cleanliness thing. I, outside of my practice, also work in the service industry, and so much of what I do with people, the interactions that I have with people, are things that I recognized I needed to release every day because that was what was affecting my sleep, or even the emotions that I'd wake up with. I realized were not mine. So, one, dry brushing is huge to kind of get my lymphatic system going. I found that even having that moment of being mindful of, like, just saying to myself, not even officially having a mantras, but just being like, hey body, I love you. Like, this is what we're doing today. Let's get our like lymph nodes going and our immune system going today so you can help me detoxify as we come through the day. That's kind of how I do that. And mindfully showering or drawing a bath. Showering, one, for me, is a way for me to wake up. It's a way for me to, I have a hard time sometimes getting out of bed, especially because my body is still rehabbing from constant burnout. So showers help me wake up my senses in a way that wake me up. And baths, like when I'm noticing that my joints or my body are feeling really depleted, or it almost feels like lead is in my bones, there's something about water, and I'm sure that most people know, like, that element of water is such a nurturing feeling of being held. And I love to do Epsom salt baths to really help my body detoxify and release. So baths are huge. And then, so much of my rest rituals also include getting good quality rest. So I actually started investing in mouth tape. So I didn't even realize how important this was. And most of my practices, I will say, disclaimer, I'm such a huge skeptic all the time that I will always practice things first for myself and then see how it feels before I'm ever recommending it, because also every body is different. But I sleep with mouth tape, which is a really weird thing to get used to, especially as a mouth breather. But I just found that like my nasal passages and whatnot and my quality of sleep, like I didn't realize that I was snoring so much, and that would keep me in a liminal state of sleep. So sleep tape has been helpful. I wouldn't recommend it if you have allergies, because then it's just it actually stokes up your nervous system where you feel like you can't breathe. And then I found a sleep mask, which was soft enough, but a blackout one, which cost a little bit more money because I felt like I went through so many different sleep masks to find something. But that sleep mask I usually use for my midday naps to help me recharge, because I'm so sensitive to light that I just need to additionally help my body to wind down. And then other rest practices that I do have been finding, this has been new, is now that I have more energy to move my body, I've had to completely shift away from all the workouts and ways that I used to move my body than I did before. I used to be really big into cardio and HIIT and spin classes and running marathons and all these things. So my rest practice has been giving myself the opportunity to attend a class, but make choices for myself that make me feel good. So if I choose to go to a flow class, I make a deal with myself that, hey, I'm going to show up in the capacity that feels good for my body. And if I don't complete the class, that's okay. If I spend the entire class in Shavasana or in meditation, that's okay. And I think that really pours out into every aspect of things, where, especially with adrenal fatigue, it's almost like mapping out your capacity for so many different things, because overwhelm is one of the primary ways that I experience it. And so finding ways to almost just allow yourself a space to explore what feels good or what doesn't feel good has probably been the primary rest practice that I have.
Yeah, that remembrance that we have choices is so sensitive to trauma stored in the body. Remembering that when we're doing a practice, that we have the choice to modify that practice however we need to, whether it's leaving the room, whether it's lying down, whether it's doing something different, is just honoring of the system. And I think that's beautiful that you practice that. A lot of what you shared can be just little add-ons to everyday life. So sleep a little deeper, put an eye mask on. If you take a bath, do some dry brushing right before. And I think that they're so tangible, and there's something that I might call like adding that extra yum to your practice, like these little moments
I
of
love
yum.
that.
Yeah. And I will definitely be re-listening and taking your advice for some of these because they sound so good. I wanted to circle back to this energy clearing practice that you have, because I know that you have an energy clearing meditation on the Science and Magic portal, and I love it. I use it around the full moon. Can you talk just a little bit about what happens over time? Like, what does that look like when energy is not cleared in the body? And maybe think of folks also who don't understand what energy is. Like, it feels really distant to them. What's a way that maybe we can work together on that, but to describe this feeling of energy needs to be cleared and the importance of it?
When I think about energy clearing, which probably is the number one thing that I work with folks on when I'm working with Reiki, specifically with that modality, I find that I get so excited because I'm like, ooh, how do I describe like energy? Like in a way that's accessible, right? Like, so how I usually explain things, everything has energy. Everything. Everything down to this table, down to our bodies. The air is energy, water, all the things. And what I guess I will start with the fact that, like, we know that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, right? And so when I think about energy, and so much of, there's so many ways, my brain is like going in so many different directions. I get so excited. The way that I describe energy is almost as if what's coming to mind right now is if you came into a room and someone, there are two different rooms. You come into one room and someone is lighting a stick of incense or diffusing essential oil, and it's pleasant to you. You kind of want to drink it in, and it feels wonderful and great. And maybe you leave that room and you still have that scent on you. So that's one room. You go into the second room, and someone is, I don't know, smoking a cigarette or reeks of, maybe it's hot garbage or some equally unpleasant scent that covers you with that smell, and you come out. I think of energy in that way, where one, I think, is the first thought and acknowledgement that everything is energy. So regardless of the physical energy that you create, imagining that there's also an energy that you emanate. So whatever you're feeling or thinking or carrying, often emotions, are things that actually radiate out outside of your body, almost like a scent, almost like pheromones, really. And the second layer of that is being able to take responsibility for your energy. And so, what that means or looks like on a basis is one, getting to know and maybe trust in your energy, meaning that, you know, that there is an energy to you, that there's an energy that you feel with emotions or thoughts or behaviors. And two, if you've ever been in a conversation when someone in a desperate need to connect with you accidentally emotionally dumps, it's almost the same thing with energy, where, like, when we're in a sense of maybe desperation or needing to be connected with or feeling really lost or unclear, there's a way that that energy can also leak out and be projected onto other people unknowingly. And there are also ways where, you meet people who are like literal sunbeams in real life that you just, being around them, like, you feel all that warmth in that same way. So one, everything is energy. Two, being able to notice and take responsibility for energy. I set that up because in our day to day, and this maybe could have been more applicable pre-COVID, but more especially now during this pandemic, is I think more people are being tuned into energy, because I think now that we've had this ability, this global permission to slow down and rest, we're taking the moment to notice, hey, I actually really enjoy being at home for X amount of hours and focusing in on me. Or alternatively, hey, I really miss people and the energy that they gave me, or the way that they enlivened my life being around people, to be simplistic. And either way, what I wish more people know or knew is the same way that you emanate energy, you're also receiving people's energy. And to be out in the world, like, if you've ever had the experience of being on a bus or in a concert or like a really densely populated area, and kind of felt the way of absorbing all these things that might not be yours. Like for me personally, the way that I can describe it is I was down in LA a couple weekends ago, and immediately touching down into the center of LA, I just felt overwhelmed. Like, one, it was a new place. I hadn't left my house in a long time. I had my whole routine. And there was just a lot of people, a lot of people. I remember waking up the next morning and feeling so many different emotions. And I had to sit with those emotions because I knew, one, I was like, well, I'm not depressed. I know that my adrenal fatigue is in check. Like, why am I feeling super heavy or irritable or just prickly or like all these things that are so far away from who I know that my state to be? That kind of clues me into when I need to do an energy clearing. So I guess an analogy to that is like, imagine that you go out into the world. It's almost like the same way that you wash your clothes or wash the dishes. If you ate on the same plate over and over again, there would just be an accumulation of particles and food on that plate. And it'd probably take away from the enjoyment of eating whatever it is that you're eating. And so, in the same way that we wash ourselves, our bodies, or our plates, we have to clear our energy. And I think because it's something that we can't see or touch, it's something that we tend to forget about all the time. And energy clearings, to kind of demystify them for people, it is as simple as taking 3 breaths, maybe at the beginning or the end of your day, to create space to notice yourself, like what is yours, what is not yours, and then consciously creating that space to maybe let go of what's not yours. And maybe that's something that you can integrate into your practice multiple times a day. I know I'm that person, but I'm not as good at doing that every day, so I'll say that too.
I love all the analogies that you shared. I really felt that. And you shared it from so many different angles and senses about what energy is. And part of having this podcast is being able to talk about the unseen and the things that we don't quite know. And yet there is this groundedness to energy where, the heart beats and creates electricity, and there's a magnetic field around the body that we can sense and feel within each other. And I also, it brought to mind how we're more sensitive to energy in the past, year and a half. In some ways, I've been connecting virtually more with people, and I think many other people same. And I feel so connected to you that I often forget that we've never been in person together. And same with Holly, the dream oracle and the portal. I forget. But you both are my friends, even though I haven't seen you in person. And I feel that connection, but it's our energy that's connecting. Like, yes, we're looking at a screen, a 3D screen, but it's more than just a picture that we're connecting to. There's an energy field that we're resonating back and forth from each other, or that we're in, that is mysterious. And I don't know how, but there is a connection there that's beyond just being a picture or a sound with our words. I love your description too of energy clearing needing to happen when there's like a prickliness or irritability almost. And for me, it feels like a sludginess. That would be how I describe it. And I love taking a shower too, and I feel that. It just feels like water does something to just scrub the energy field. And distinguishing between what's ours and what we've picked up can be the most helpful practice in so many ways. Not even just these feelings that are not pleasant to feel of like that irritability, but also what are my goals I have for myself? What's mine and what's society's? How do I wish to spend today truly in my heart of hearts? Like, how do I wish to spend my day? Or like, what does this energy that I'm carrying, like, what's the distinction between that can be so helpful in a world that in some ways is really connected, in some ways not. But I just appreciate you sharing energy from all those angles. So I know you share classes on the portal. You have yoga classes, meditation. You offer self-massage classes even, and tapping. Just so nourishing. How can listeners reach you outside of the Science and Magic portal? Maybe share a little bit about what you're offering at this moment, how to best connect with you. That would be amazing.
Thank you. It's funny, as we were talking about this, I currently am renegotiating my relationship with social media. I think that's something that you and I can definitely bond over. And it's also, unfortunately, the easiest way to keep in contact with me and what I'm up to. But you can find me on Instagram at Liz Andolong. It's kind of a mouthful to spell, so it might be easier to copy and paste that. But I also send, I would say once a month, I send like a little newsletter to folks, kind of recapping the month, looking forward to the month, and highlighting upcoming classes and opportunities to practice with me. At the moment, I am practicing and helping create a platform called Before Noon, which currently has its own platform, but we're working on offering. It's almost like we want you to think of the platform as you're on like a virtual self-care club. And so our focus is offering alternative healing therapies for folks. So we've got tarot on there, there's ecstatic dance, and I'll be doing energy healing, but coupling that with restorative yoga, which will be launching in November. And other than that, I also do often sometimes one-off workshops with Manifest House, which is a wellness space focused on creating accessibility for femme and women identifying BIPOC. We found that so much of wellness is this incredible gift, but what gets in the way of that is finding accessibility that's affordable for people. And the truth of the matter is, I find that so many folks in my community, so many incredible people just may not have the means to join. So I'm trying as much as I can to create as many accessible options for people to join that as well. And then just recently I began teaching in-person classes, which is crazy to say, once a week, at a local studio called Love Story Yoga. So folks can join that way as well.
Beautiful. And if listeners want to work with you one-on-one, do you offer one-on-one Reiki or coaching, or what does that look like?
All of the above. So right now in transition, I've been scaling back from one-on-one practices just to begin to really focus in on what is it that I can truly offer to folks. Primarily, I was working one-on-one with people for yoga and Reiki. And I think now it's more about almost like tuning into folks' energy and being able to help them get a grander picture of what's going on, and maybe offering a bit more guidance or space so we can collaborate and figure out how to get folks into their most energetic and authentic selves. But I'm also recognizing that now, working with rest is such a huge, important part too. But if you're interested in collaborating and working with me one-on-one, I'm pretty open to working with anybody. So you can also reach out either on IG or my website, and I would love to work with you.
Wonderful. We'll link everything below in the show notes. And I just feel like I could have asked you so many more questions and we could have spoken for probably a couple more hours. But I'll end it here for now, and maybe we'll have another conversation in the future. I feel so lucky to have you on this show, and thank you for sharing your energy and your words and your experience with all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true delight and joy to get to know you. And it still blows my mind that we haven't been in person, because I feel like I know you so well. Like I know your energy so well. So thank you for this opportunity and just to be here with you. Your energy and your work is just so important in this world. And I know that your listeners and me as well really, truly appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much, Liz.